Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. We're going to be doing some grunt work. We're sitting in a 2015 Chevy Silverado 1500 in need of some ball joints. To get started, we'll jack the vehicle up, put it on jack stands, and we'll pull off our hubcap. 22 millimeter. We want to try and get this center nut off first. So even before jacking it up, if you don't have a strong enough impact, you can break it loose while it's on the ground. But if you forget and continue to pull the tire off, and you're like, oh man, I forgot the center nut. That's okay. You can take a screwdriver and wedge it in between the rotor fin and the caliper, and that'll prevent it from spinning, and you can still break it loose. Mine is a 36 millimeter. Then you can push on the center to make sure the axle's free. If it's not, you may have to thread the nut back on and tap it a few times. Now we'll take the tie rod off. Tie rod is a 21 millimeter. If the ball just starts spinning on you and you can't get that nut off, take a pry bar and push down, and that'll wedge the tie rod into its little slot and prevent it from spinning. Then you can get it off that way. A few taps. There we go. And just set it aside. Now the knuckle's free to spin or move around where you need it to. And we'll take our caliper off next. We'll take a screwdriver and put it in between the caliper and the rotor and just pull on it. And that'll suck our caliper pistons in a little. 18 millimeter gets our caliper bracket off. One on the bottom. One on the top, and the whole bracket and caliper come together. And we'll suspend that. Let's have some baling wire. Okay. Now we'll take our rotor off. There's a 30 millimeter Torx, or not 30 millimeter, but a T30. We'll just pop that off. Now we'll take our wheel speed sensor out. It's an Allen. It's a 3/16 Allen or a 5 millimeter Allen, whichever one you got. That should wiggle out. Now, depending on your rust area, if you have a lot of rust in your area, that may be a little harder to come out. And then on top, we have a 10 millimeter to pull this bracket off of the knuckle. This whole thing can just be set aside. So now we want to pull off this upper control arm ball joint, 18 millimeter. You can break it loose. And then if you have a ratcheting wrench, makes it go a little faster. Again, if it starts spinning on you inside, just take a pry bar and wedge down on the upper control arm, and that'll again pinch it and prevent it from moving. A few whacks. All right, that's separated. Now we can do our lower ball joint. 24 millimeter. And again, the same way. If it's spinning on you, just use a pry bar and wedge it in there. So a few whacks on the bottom. There we go. So now it's just a combination of pushing the axle in and wiggling the knuckle, and it'll separate. You can tap a little on the axle if you need to. There we go. Knuckles off. Where the sway bar link is, you can take the axle and push it up and over that sway bar nut, and it just holds the axle in place up out of the way. Let me zoom you in. So you can see the top of the ball joint has been stamped and pushed out. So you want to take some kind of punch and just push those back in all the way around before you try to press it out. Otherwise, it won't go anywhere. It doesn't take much to do it. This is just, I don't know where I got this, but just a piece of metal, a punch, a chisel, whatever you have. There, so you can see it there before I press it out. There's this back one that's a little hard to get to. May not be a big deal. I'm gonna try still to just get it a little, but one may not be a big deal. The press may be able to bend that up as it comes out. So at this point, we're ready to press out the ball joint. Just so you can see, so this is the bottom or the back side of the ball joint. It's pretty wide. So when you get your ball joint pressed, you want something big enough that'll be bigger than the diameter of this flange here. So whatever you have, and that's the receiver. So this receiver will come down here like that. And then on the top, it'll just be this threaded ram rod, if that's what it's called, a ram rod, I don't know. But it'll just be the threaded piece hitting against the top, and then the receiver piece on the bottom. You can start it by hand, get everything lined up. Make sure we're good to go. Sorry, my head was in the way. 23 millimeter for my tool. Your tool may be different, but whatever you got, we're ready to tighten it up and it'll punch right out. There it goes, it's starting to give. Let me show you. You can see there how it's starting to give. So continuing to use the impact will just push it the rest of the way through. All right, there it is, captured. All right, we got the old ball joint out. I'm gonna go ahead, take a water break, then when we come back, put the new ball joint in, slap everything back together, tighten and torque it down, and take it for a spin. All right, we are back. On the lower control arm, I just put a little silicone paste as a lubricant, so the ball joint goes in a little easier. If your ball joint has a grease fitting, we'll go ahead and put that on first. In your ball joint kit, you want to find the right adapter so that it hits on the bottom ring of your ball joint. And that'll be used to push it up into the hole. Then you want the right receiver here. For my tool, in order to get enough ground clearance, I have to jack up the control arm just a little. You may or may not have to do this on yours. So we'll put that in like that. Put our press in like that, and back this out. Put our receiver on. Okay, there we go. And then for mine, I have to use a wrench on the bottom. Now you don't need power tools even to take it off. You don't need power tools, but I do recommend a good breaker bar. It does take a lot of force. All right, do it till it bottoms out. I like to tap it just a few times, probably not necessary. And that's it. New ball joint is pressed in. Back this out. Oh my goodness. Ugh. Pull it off. Then we want to put our snap ring on. There we go. I like to tap it with a screwdriver just to make sure that it's set in all the way. All right, then if yours has a grease fitting, we'll go ahead and put grease in it now. I like to give it a few squirts, move it around. Squirt it again, move it. Squirt it, move it. And then we'll want to move our grease fitting so it's in a spot that can be accessed once the tire's on and stuff. All right, that's it. You can put the boot on. So depending on how your boot is, this is a metal ring on mine. This is AC Delco, so it's a Chevy genuine. You just want to put it on. You can use a piece of your ball joint kit to push on that metal ring. We're ready for the knuckle to go back on. So you put a little anti-seize or some kind of lubricant on the splines of the axle. That'll help it go in easier and then off easier in the future. Take our steering knuckle. Well, first, let's move this back. There we go. Take our knuckle into, let me see, I think it's ball joint first. There we go. So there'll be a lot of wiggling and moving around, but all right, so you just have to wiggle it and move it until you get that lower ball joint in enough to get a nut on it. There we go. Once you get a couple threads, then we can go ahead and suck it up. So my new nut is a 27. Yours may be different. There we go. Push this in. All right, put that nut back on, just a few threads. Get our upper in. Let's use a pry bar, be easier. There we go. Just enough to get a few threads on that one. Torque specs on the lower ball joint is 37 foot-pounds. 37 plus 135 degrees. So how you can get your degrees is mark the nut and the knuckle in the same place, and then you know how far it's gone. 180 degrees is straight across, 90 degrees is in the middle, so you want it somewhere in between 90 and 180. You can do our top. So mine is just spinning in its thing, so let's take a pry bar, push it down. There we go. Again, it's 37 foot-pounds plus an additional 90. Now we can put our wheel speed sensor back on. Alrighty. Don't forget to put our washer on first. I'm just gonna tighten that down. All right, let's put the brakes back on. My shoes fell out, so I'm gonna just put them in real quick. Oh, duh. Gotta put a rotor on. That would help. Now it's up to you whether you put that bolt back in for the rotor or not. It's just to hold it in place during assembly. So it's not critical. And just light and snug is fine. All right, now we can do this. So I'm just gonna get the thread started. There we go. Now you want these to have Loctite on them. when you put it back together. Take this top one back out. All Loctite. Now, depending on your RPO code, there's two different torque specs. If your RPO is JD9, it's 170 foot-pounds. If your RPO is J96, it's 221 foot-pounds. And you can find that RPO code in the glove box. All right, got those torqued. So now we can put our tie rod on. Our tie rod nut is a lock nut. So if we're gonna reuse the original one, we wanna put Loctite on the threads. And this is 27 plus 90. All right, double check our work. Make sure everything is torqued. I like to just mark it when I do it. So a quick visual inspection will let me know. Our last torque is our center nut. That's 188 foot-pounds. All right, we are ready to put the tire back on and take it for a spin. Now, because we had these calipers pulled out, before you put it in gear, you just want to pump the brakes to get the calipers to tighten or squeeze on the pads again. And that's it. Good job. All right, there you go. The repair is finished. Not a whole lot to it, not a lot of tools required. Just an impact socket set comes in really handy. An impact gun if you have it. If not, recommend definitely having a breaker bar on hand. Now, the ball joint press you can rent from the auto parts store if you do not own one yourself. Hopefully it'll have the adapters you need for this. The trickiest part, or not really tricky, but an important step, is to punch around that ball joint on the top to get rid of those dimples that secure it in place. The new ball joint will come with a snap ring instead. Other than that, you're just pressing it out, pressing it back in, bolting everything back together, and you're done. Now, there are two different lower control arms depending on your vehicle. Some are aluminum and then some are steel. This was the steel lower control arm. So I'm not 100% sure the difference between them as far as the repair. I do know the ball joint itself, though, is a different part number. All right, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. See you on the next one.